I'd now like to introduce today's speakers, Rachel Schattman and Kate Yerxa. Rachel is an assistant professor in the School of Food and Agriculture. Her work, as you'll see, is focused on creating sustainable agriculture and sustainable food systems. And Kate Yerxa is an extension professor with a joint appointment with Cooperative Extension and the School of Food and Agriculture. She's the state coordinator of the expanded food nutrition education program through UMaine Extension. I guess it's been about over half a year, right before the pandemic, that Rachel came over to the Mitchell Center to introduce herself and meet with Linda Silka and me. It quickly became apparent, like in that meeting, that she's well on her way to being a really important leader of important work here at UMaine that's going to matter in Maine and beyond Maine. I want to say that one of the things that you'll hear in today's talk is this really important balance between thinking about research and thinking about practice, how we do work in the real world. In the Mitchell Center, our language for that has been for some time now, linking knowledge with action, not just academic knowledge, but knowledge and know-how from many different members of society. And this is a great example of that kind of work. The title, Safety Nets and Bootstraps, Mainers and Food Insecurity in the Time of COVID-19. Welcome to Rachel and Kate.
Thank you so much, David. We are so excited to be here with you all, and I am going to start sharing the presentation, if you will bear with me for just a half a second. All right, how are we doing? Can everyone see the slides? Okay, great. Well, it is my pleasure to be here with you today. Thank you very much to the Mitchell Center for having us. As David so kindly introduced me and Kate, my name is Rachel Schattman. I am with the School of Food and Agriculture, and Kate Yerxa, my co-presenter, has a joint appointment with UMaine Extension and with the School of Food and Ag. And we're very excited to be with you here today to talk about a project that we are currently doing. It's actually in process, looking at the effects of COVID-19 on food insecurity in the state of Maine. We are part of a national coalition called the National Food Access and COVID Research Team, or NFACT. And as the main reps to NFACT, we've been conducting a survey over the last couple of months. And our hope is that over the long term, we're going to be able to compare the results that we are getting with that from our colleagues from around the country. And I should also say that our plan is to reissue this survey several times over the next year and a half to get a longitudinal look at how COVID-19 is affecting Mainers. Our work is generously supported by the School of Food and Ag and by the Mitchell Center. So we just like to acknowledge their support. I'm going to get us started with a quick overview of what we're going to cover today. We'll kick off with some background and context. Specifically, Kate is going to help us get acquainted with some key terms and definitions related to poverty and food insecurity. As David mentioned, we'll take a break at the midway point to give you a chance to interact with one another through breakout sessions. That'll last for about 10 minutes. And then in the second half of the presentation is really when Kate and I are going to be digging into the preliminary results from our survey. And then we'll end with a short question and answer period and full group discussion. So we hope that you will enjoy it. We hope that you will come away with some very discrete things listed under the objectives on this slide, specifically a better understanding of what food insecurity is and how it relates to poverty, a better sense of the factors that affect food choice, and lastly, an awareness of some of these emerging trends that we're starting to see related to the effects of COVID. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Kate. And Kate, you can just let me know when you want me to change the slides.
Great. Thank you so much, Rachel. And welcome, everybody. This is such a lovely turnout for our session. So in my part of the session, or the first part rather, I'll be sharing some background information and statistics about poverty and food insecurity, both nationally and here in Maine. And I'll also briefly review what federal nutrition assistance programs, or sometimes called safety net programs, are, and what nutrition education programs are that are funded at the federal level. Because we have a wide variety of attendees, this may be new information for some of you, or it may be very well-known information for many of you. So I see that we have a a very broad background of attendees, which is wonderful. The USDA defines being in poverty as having an income below a federally determined income or poverty threshold. Poverty thresholds were developed in the 60s and are adjusted annually to account for inflation. So federal poverty level represent the federal government's estimate, or a point below which a family of a given size has enough cash income to sufficiently meet basic needs. So any individual or family with a total income less than that amount is deemed to be at the federal poverty level. So they may need some assistance meeting those basic needs. And keeping in mind, there are different types of poverty, meaning generational, maybe urban versus rural poverty, and situational. And so we may be seeing more individuals experiencing situational poverty during COVID-19. So for example, what's an example of a federal poverty level? In 2020, a family of 3 with an income less than $21,720 would be defined as a family living in poverty. So consider that 100% of the poverty level. So that income level is used to determine participation in federal assistance programs or federal nutrition assistance programs. These programs include WIC, SNAP, Medicaid, or what we call Maine Care here in Maine. So for example, SNAP has a gross income eligibility of less than 130% of the federal poverty level, or to participate in the WIC program, an individual or a family has to have a gross income of less than 185% of the federal poverty level. So for example, a family of 4 with a gross income of less than $48,470 would be income eligible for WIC. So it also should be noted that application to federal programs is just more than income eligibility. For example, for SNAP, applicants, the application process takes into account gross income of the household, their net income after deductions, or assessment of assets in that household. So you can see the statistics here that nationally in 2018, the percent of people estimated to be living in poverty in the US was 13.1% of the population, or that's over 41 million people. So interestingly enough, the official poverty rate in 2017 was 12.3%. So it's about 39.7 million people living in poverty. So it has increased from 2017 to 2018. Maine saw a slight increase in the poverty rate from 11.1% to 11.6% from 2017 to 2018. So in 2017, that actually was a state low for the percent of individuals estimated to be living in poverty, which was down from the high of 14.7% in 2012. So you can see the child poverty rate in 2018 was 14.8% of children under the age of 18 were living in poverty, which is up from 12.4% from 2017. Let's have the next slide, that would be great. So this is a nice illustration from USDA defining food insecurity or food security. So food security really means access by all people at all times to have enough food for an active and healthy life. So the USDA defines food insecurity as the limited or uncertain availability of nutritionally adequate and safe foods, or limited or uncertain ability to acquire acceptable foods in a socially acceptable way. So food insecure households include those with the low food security or very low food security definition that you can see in that image there. So the label of food insecurity has 2 subgroups. So in 2016, the labeling of food insecurity transition. So individuals or households with low food security had an old label of food insecurity without hunger, where individuals or households that had or categorized as having very low food insecurity had the old label of food insecurity with hunger. So under food insecurity, you can see the low food security area really is defined as reporting of reduced quality, variety, or desirability of the diet. So there tends to be very little indication of reduced food intake. And this may be an area of food insecurity where we may observe the juxtaposition of individuals experiencing food insecurity, but also experiencing overweight and obesity. There tends not to be a lack of calories in the household, but maybe rather a lack of quality, maybe fruits and vegetables, whole grains, lack of variety, maybe higher calorie, low nutrient foods. So there may actually also still be a risk of vitamin or mineral deficiencies in individuals experiencing low food security. Okay. So here are some national and state food insecurity rates. It is really important to note that these are 2019 national statistics. They were collected in December of 2019 and do not reflect the potential impacts of COVID-19, which makes our work really exciting and very timely. So how do we collect food insecurity data? This data is collected based upon a National Food Security Survey that's part of an annual supplement to the monthly current population survey. And so that is actually a part of the Census Bureau and the Bureau of Labor Statistics process. So in December of each year, after completing the labor force interview, about 40,000 households respond to the food security questions and to questions about food spending and use of federal food assistance programs. So this information here really are estimates related to the population. So there are a series of questions for survey participants. There can be a 6-item, a 10-item, or an 18-item survey. The longer 18-item survey assesses food insecurity with households with children. And typically the time period is in the past year, or it can be used in the past 30 days. So remembering that food insecure households are households that at times during the year, they had uncertain or inability to acquire enough food to meet the needs of all the members in their household because they may have had insufficient money or other resources to acquire food. So you can see those statistics there. We can move on to our next slide. So here's where we move into some information specific for Maine. And this is information that was accumulated through Feeding America in 2020, and it's based upon 2018 food insecurity data. So you can see in Maine, 1 in 8 people are estimated to be food insecure, and 1 in 5 children are estimated to struggle with food insecurity. Feeding America also calculates the monetary need for households who are experiencing food insecurity to meet their needs. And you can see that to meet the needs of our estimated population in Maine who are experiencing food insecurity, we need over $100 million to meet those needs. So interestingly, in comparison, nationally in 2018, an estimated 1 in 9 Americans were food insecure, equating to about 37 million Americans, and more than 11 million children nationally were experiencing food insecurity. This is another screenshot from Feeding America's excellent resource called Map the Meal Gap. Again, this is 2018 data. There were an estimated 173,000 food insecure individuals in Maine. And while according to poverty data, there were an estimated over 150,000 people living at the federal poverty level. So what you see also in this illustration, which is very important to note, that there are a large percentage of individuals who are experiencing food insecurity who do not qualify for federal food assistance or federal nutrition assistance programs. So there's a gap there. You can see here on this data in 2018, 39% of individuals did not qualify for federal food assistance programs. And the next slide is another screenshot, but it's focusing on child food insecurity here. And you can see that in 2018, there was an estimated 14.8% of children under 18 living in poverty. And that equates to almost 36,000 children, where it was estimated that over 47,000 children in Maine in 2018 were experiencing food insecurity. Again, so we can't just label or make the assumption that all food insecure people may be living in poverty. So this slide just gives a very brief overview of the differences or examples of nutrition assistance programs, those safety net programs. And I did want to note that not all federal nutrition assistance programs are listed on this slide. These are typically nutrition assistance programs that are administered through the Food and Nutrition Services. Not included here are all of the child nutrition programs, the TFAP program, which is the Emergency Food Assistance Program, which supplies support foods to food pantries and distribution, another program called the Commodity Supplement Food Program, and that is there. So these are the safety net programs. Some may feel that there is a slight flaw to the process around application or transition from these safety net programs, in the respect that if household income increases, maybe full-time employment, loss of several of these nutrition assistance programs doesn't allow a transition time for maybe a family or a single parent to start saving money for housing, for childcare, to have some savings to purchase additional food when the loss of these programs happen. So there is an opportunity for consideration or rethinking how we best support individuals who are using these programs. And then on the other, I'll have you go back, yeah. The federal nutrition education programs, the expanded food and nutrition education program is a program that all cooperative extension programs nationally deliver. It is administered through the National Institute of Food and Agriculture, which is part of a USDA program. Then we have programs like SNAP-Ed, which is the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program education. It is the educational component of SNAP, which had an official name change from food stamps in 2008 rather. So sometimes we still refer to SNAP as food stamps, but part of it is too that the name change reflects the reality that this is a supplemental nutrition assistance program. It is not designed to provide all of the adequate nutrition for an extended period of time for an individual or a household. It is a supplemental program. And then Team Nutrition is a food and nutrition service program like SNAP-Ed, designed to provide education and support for child nutrition programs. And this slide illustrates some factors that may affect food choice. It definitely is not all encompassing, but I did want to provide an illustration that there are so many factors that really influence why individuals choose the foods that they do, whether it's purchasing or acquiring through a food pantry. So not listed here may also include some health factors as well, maybe mood, stress, which I think many of us may feel that we're under, and also maybe a feeling of guilt of not being able to provide enough food, so maybe different choices are made for households that are experiencing food insecurity. So we're really excited because the research that's being conducted in Maine and nationally as part of NFACT, we're hoping will shed light on how food access, availability, program participation, and some other factors are affecting food procurement and consumption of adults in Maine and nationally.
Thank you so much, Kate. That was a great overview. So the time has come for you all to put on your thinking caps. and warm up your voices. In just a few seconds, Carol is going to send you into a breakout room with about 5 other people. And when you're in these small groups, I'd love it if you could respond to 3 statements. I'm going to go through the statements in just a second while we're all together, but I'm also, actually Kate is going to put them in the chat box, which you should all still be able to see once you depart into your breakouts. The statements we have chosen are intended to be a little bit provocative, and they're also representative of some common underlying perspectives related to food insecurity, perspectives that I would argue have driven food security policy in our country. So as you consider these statements, I encourage you to reflect on your own experiences and try to draw some connections between those experiences, the statements, and some of the themes that Kate just finished discussing. So here we go. The first statement is, there will always be people who are hungry. The second is, food is a human right. And then the final statement is, people should pull themselves up by their bootstraps. Okay, Carol, I think we are ready to send everybody away for 10 minutes, and we will see you all when you come back. All right, welcome back. I hope you had some interesting conversations, and I'm curious to hear how those conversations went. Perhaps we can circle back around to them during the Q&A and discussion at the end. We're going to transition now into talking about the survey that Kate and I have been working on. As you have heard, the purpose of the study is to assess food security and food access implications during the current COVID-19 outbreak. And I'm going to give you a very quick overview of our approach. The survey is something that we have contracted with a company called Qualtrics to run, meaning that Qualtrics is responsible for finding participants and ensuring we get a certain number of responses. We started the survey collection in early July, and when I agreed to do the talk for the Mitchell Center this month, I thought, oh, for sure, we will have all of the data in by then, no problem. We are still collecting data, so what I have to present here is preliminary, and Kate and I will be working on putting together some summaries that we'll be excited to share with anyone who is interested at a later date. The target population for the survey are Maine residents over the age of 18 who have been living in the state since at least January 1st of this year. And the results that I'm going to share with you today are based on 485 responses, 409 of which are complete responses, meaning they answered every question. In terms of who answered the survey, I've put up some basic demographic information on the slide. You can see we're looking at predominantly a white sample of respondents, not of Hispanic, Latino, and Spanish origin mostly. Age is pretty well distributed between the different categories that I have described up on the right. The sample is majority female with an income less than $50,000 in general. We actually asked Qualtrics to make sure that we had a 50% of our sample that made more than $50,000 and 50% that made less, to get a sense of how income plays a role in some of these important topics. So that's who took the survey. Now let's get to the meat of what they had to say. The first thing we wanted to know was, in general, if Mainers have changed how and where they get food because of COVID. So let's start with the places that we all go to get food. In this chart, you can see that we asked about a wide range of different sources, and we asked respondents to report if they got food at these places since the COVID outbreak, which we dated as March 11th of this year, in the year prior to COVID, both before and after COVID, or not at all. So to break this information into some more manageable chunks for you, I'm going to highlight a few different categories of food provisioning approaches. The first of these is what you might call conventional provisioning. In a nutshell, they represent traditional places that one goes to buy food with money. So food can either be whole or prepared. You probably will not be surprised to note that grocery stores are by far the most widely used source of food, followed by takeout restaurants and convenience stores. I think it's worth noting that the proportion of respondents who reported using takeout services in the post-COVID period, but not before, as well as the number of respondents who reported that they stopped using dine-in restaurant services, is what we would expect, considering how things went over the last several months. So it is encouraging to see that reflected in the survey data. The second category I wish to draw your attention to is local food provisioning, meaning farmers markets, local farm stands, farm stores, online farm stores. I've worked with fruit and vegetable growers in an extension capacity in the past, and it seems like this spring there were a lot of diversified farmers in Maine and in the Northeast who were having a hard time keeping up with demand. A lot of people were interested in seeking out farm products. And we do see this to some degree in the survey data. There are people who reported going to farms or seeking out local products either for the first time or continuing to do so. But it'll be interesting to catch up with growers at the end of this season to see if that perceived peak in interest translated into higher gross sales. Next, I draw your attention to the category we're calling food assistance programs, which includes some of the federal assistance programs that Kate talked about that we're going to get more into detail with, as well as community meals at churches and synagogues and things like that, as well as meals distributed through the National Guard, which was less of a thing here in Maine than it was in other states. I especially want to draw your attention to the bar labeled food assistance, which shows that 12.5% of respondents who had not previously used food assistance programs in the year prior to COVID enrolled in one or more of these programs since the start of the pandemic. So we're going to get a lot more into detail about that in a bit. The last category is what we have called self-provisioning, which includes home food production like gardening, fishing, hunting, raising livestock for home use, etc. Especially in a rural state like ours, these approaches have been used for a long time as an important way to feed ourselves. And we're curious about the effects on people's interest in these approaches because of COVID. Again, anecdotal evidence suggests that there was a boom in interest in gardening this spring. Some of the seed companies put temporary freezes on home gardener orders so that they could ensure they would be able to fill orders for commercial growers, for example. In my personal experience, I've had a really hard time finding canning jars this month, but it's nice to kind of test out what we're seeing anecdotally with a more representative sample like this. So in addition to the changes in where people get food pre versus post beginning of the pandemic, we also want to understand what kind of experiences Mainers are having when they do go to get food. And ultimately in the future, when we've completed our data collection, our analysis, we'll explore how these experiences influence behavior. But for now, I have a lot of bar charts for you. We see that respondents to the statements on the slide show that folks in general felt like they knew how to get help getting food if they needed it. However, a striking percentage of respondents reported that they reduced grocery shopping to limit their exposure to COVID. Over 25% of respondents reported that. 25% of respondents reported they couldn't find as much food as they wanted to buy in the store, and they couldn't find the types of food that their household preferred, or they had to go to more places than usual to find the food they would normally buy. When respondents reported the types of foods that they had trouble finding, things like canned foods that were shelf stable rose to the top, as well as pasta, meat, bread. Some of these staples like flour and vegetables and frozen foods also were noted. I'm sure if we had added household items to this list, toilet paper would have been the largest word in the word cloud, without a doubt. But Kate, I think you might have wanted to add something here.
Yeah, just we really don't want people to have the mindset of stockpiling food. And I think these are foods that are most shelf stable, that individuals felt like, oh, if I just have these on hand in case I can't get to the store again. But really what we're trying to do within Cooperative Extension in Maine and nationally, I know, is having a plan, have a meal plan, and having 1 to 2 weeks worth of food as part of that meal plan on hand versus that perception of stockpiling. So creating lack of food for other people, those bare shelves when we go to the store.
Great. So all of this kind of speaks to the experiences of many Mainers across various socioeconomic groups in different parts of the state. And it sets an important context. I think there were people feeling limited in terms of their ability to get food of the type or the quantity they wanted this spring and the summer, including people that probably had not dealt with these particular challenges before. However, we know from Kate's earlier slides, there's a significant number of people in our community who are very well acquainted with the types of challenges that we're going to discuss more. And for people who experience food insecurity, the root of these challenges is not always limited to food availability, but if food is not available, it makes all the other challenges that much more difficult. So we're going to talk now about food insecurity specifically and how that has changed since this spring. We all know that a loss of income can have dramatic implications on households who experience poverty. So I'm going to take a step back here and just report on what people were saying about their job situation from the survey. We're aware that there's been an incredible loss of jobs that we've seen in Maine, as we've seen from across the country. In our sample, 36% of respondents reported that they had experienced a loss in hours that still affects them today. 10% reported that they are still dealing with furloughs that started at the beginning of the pandemic, and 25% report they're still coping with job losses of some kind. So the compounding effects of job loss, loss of childcare, and everything that stems from that leads to an increase in food insecurity. So in very general terms, what our survey uncovered was that the proportion of Mainers experiencing food insecurity since the beginning of the pandemic has grown significantly. Specifically, we see that there's been an 11% increase in the number of respondents who reported that they often or sometimes ran out of food and couldn't afford more when compared to the year prior to COVID. This question is a standard one that's asked in the household food security survey that Kate mentioned earlier, the results of which are reported through the USDA. And the most recent survey that was published that Kate mentioned reported that when answering this question, 3% of US households said that they sometimes ran out of food and couldn't afford more, while 9% reported that this was often true. In our sample, 26% of our survey respondents reported that they sometimes run out of food and can't afford more. 15% report that this is often true. So that's a pretty dramatic uptick. By other measures of food insecurity, we also see changes and challenges. Survey respondents reported they were less likely to be able to afford balanced meals after the pandemic, although we should note that this particular finding doesn't have statistical significance, but other measures do. For example, we had folks reporting that they were more likely to cut portions or skip meals because of a lack of money available to purchase food. And this is a very concerning trend. There are other measures of food insecurity that we have included in the survey that we are still going to continue to analyze as we finalize getting those surveys in the door. But we're curious, and we can start to kind of parse apart the effects of food insecurity and how it manifests in a couple of different ways for people. Dietary choices is a really good example of this. So we asked respondents if they were eating more, the same, or less of different types of foods after the pandemic as compared to before. And what we noticed is that 46% of respondents reported less processed and red meats, 34% reported eating less fish and seafood, and 30% reported eating fewer fruits and vegetables. And as I mentioned, I haven't yet completed all of the analysis, but my initial look at the trends suggests that respondents that reported that they were having trouble affording food were also most likely to report reducing their food consumption in these different categories. So the figures on the slide represent vegetables and fruits on the left, and on the right, processed and red meats. I didn't include the seafood plot, but it's very similar to the vegetable plot. And we guess that these changes in food purchasing behavior were not only affected by people's ability to purchase foods, but also the supply side of the food industry. So for example, Kate was very apt in pointing out to me that in April, the Washington Post reported that some of the nation's biggest meat processing plants were operating at 25% reduced capacity because so many of the employees were infected with COVID. In addition to having a hard time adjusting to market demand because with restaurants closed, expensive cuts of meats weren't being purchased, demand for hamburger was higher and more expensive in the grocery store. And Kate, I think you had a thought also about that.
Yeah, also looking towards local food production as well is a great opportunity when we think about locally harvested seafood. Frequently this summer, there were times that the price per pound of maybe lobster or scallops was lower than some cuts of beef. And I know that Cooperative Extension has collaborated with many other community partners to develop a directory to find local seafood or produce or other local foods that local farmers or producers may be having a hard time selling because of the reduction of restaurants that they typically sold to.
So considering this uptick in need, I think it makes sense to ask, are food assistance programs keeping up with the need? So let's take a look at what survey respondents reported in terms of their utilization of some of these important safety net programs. We're particularly interested in first-time users of these programs, or people who were not enrolled last year, but who enrolled after March 11th of this year. The Women, Infants, Children program, for example, Kate mentioned, provides federal grants for supplemental foods and healthcare referrals and nutrition education, and it focuses on families with young children, pregnant, breastfeeding women, non-breastfeeding postpartum women, and children up to the age of 5. New enrollments in this program are relatively low, which I think has historical context.
Typically, WIC participants may participate in the program, especially for a child's or the infant's first year. If they are a formula-fed infant, the benefit is financially larger to receive supplemental infant formula, and sometimes it may not work with a schedule for a family to attend nutrition education visits every 2 to 3 months. Additionally, with the increase in pandemic EBT for families that may have school-age children, those families may have felt that they could meet their household food needs, maybe through SNAP, the school meals, and the pandemic EBT.
Thanks. The SNAP program, as Kate also mentioned, is the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, formerly known as food stamps. It's the largest nutrition program in our country, and definitely provides a lot of benefits. The school meal programs include breakfast and school lunch, as well as summer meals. We should say that during the spring of this year, when schools were shut down, many school meal sites were still offered to families. There were delivery options that were made available. All other schools provided pickup sites. And many schools offered families several days worth of meals at a single pickup to reduce foot traffic and congestion at school sites. We also see other assistance programs being important here and having a little bit of an uptick in people enrolling in things like the Commodity Supplemental Food Program, Meals on Wheels, or other programs like that. And then lastly, we're going to pay a little bit of extra attention to food pantries, which are community-based organizations for the most part that either acquire food through a food bank like Good Shepherd, or through donations and purchases, or other federal assistance programs like TFAP. There's great variation in how these pantries are organized and run. So they're kind of hard to characterize, but they're important because they are a key player in the emergency food system, which is intended to serve people when they don't have any other options available to them. They also have a lower barrier to entry than many other food assistance programs, which require a lot of paperwork to enroll in, and a lot of kind of continual reporting of income and other things. So emergency food sites, food pantries are often people's places that they go when they need food quickly. And we see in our survey that 10% of survey respondents reported that they visited a food pantry since the beginning of the pandemic. And there is a concern that a rapid kind of uptick in food pantry use is an indication that people's needs aren't getting met through some of these other programs. So let's turn our attention a little bit more closely, and we're going to try and move quickly here with an eye on the time. We asked about specific programs like SNAP. Overwhelmingly, people said with all of these programs that they were helpful in helping them meet their families' needs, but there were some clear ways that they could be improved. So for example, lots of people noted that SNAP benefits were not available very much for them to use online. And this is a concern during something like a pandemic where people might not want to be going to places like supermarkets and increasing their exposure. Food and Nutrition Services, FNS, has launched an online purchasing pilot for SNAP. It's piloting in 45 states. Maine is not currently one of them, but there are perhaps opportunities for us to think more carefully about the online access that people might have through some of these programs. Kate, I'm going to turn it over to you for WIC.
Thank you. Yes, and as Rachel noted previously, WIC serves a relatively small number of people and reflected in this survey, but the support that WIC provides in the supplemental food is important for families with young children aged 0 to 5. In general, we see that respondents who reported being enrolled in WIC had some positive things to say about their participation. Specifically, they thought that WIC benefits are easy to use. It is important to note that WIC is actually transitioning from the paper check model to an EBT model throughout the state, so that will change the process of purchasing WIC approved foods. Additionally, respondents reported that there was limited selection of food at the stores that they could buy with their WIC benefits. If you're not familiar with WIC, there are WIC approved foods, supplemental foods, and 60% of respondents in this section reported agreement or strong agreement with that statement. Additionally, relevant to the desire to decrease the number of shopping trips and the number of places that each family may need to go to shop, 75% of the respondents in this category agreed or strongly agreed that they would be interested in using WIC benefits to shop online or curbside or parking lot pickup. So maybe there are lessons to be learned as the FNS SNAP online buying pilot is completed and how to apply that to WIC. So personally, I feel the real MVP of all federal food assistance programs during COVID-19 has been the school meals program. If you have ever worked in school nutrition or in food service in general, you know the huge amount of planning and preparation that goes into planning meals that meet federal nutrition standards, scheduling food orders to fulfill your menu plan, creating daily staff schedules to ensure that meal preparation happens. So multiple, sometimes up to 5 lunch times can feed anywhere between 100 to 600 students 5 days a week. So in a matter of a weekend, school nutrition directors had to completely change how school breakfast and lunch was planned, prepared, and disseminated after schools closed in March. School districts really pulled together to meet the needs of school families by preparing and distributing meals via pickup at schools or delivering meals to families through bus routes. And over the course of the spring, there were some federal regulations regarding how meals could be distributed. Previously in schools, maybe it was each day's worth of meals needed to be picked up. Those regulations changed over the course of the spring, where school meal programs could distribute bulk food items maybe twice a week instead of preparing single serve containers, maybe of, for example, cereal and milk, etc. The pandemic EBT that we had mentioned previously is a supplemental SNAP benefit that states can distribute under the Families First Coronavirus Act. The pandemic EBT is for children who are eligible for free or reduced price meals at school, and that allows the family to receive extra food benefits for that child. So it's a temporary benefit to help those families. Overwhelmingly, survey respondents agreed that school meals were helpful in their household. There were some concerns that school meals were not enough food, particularly in regard to sites where meals were providing several days worth of food at a time. A notable percentage of participants also reported they had difficulty picking up meals at the times they were offered, and that meal delivery was either not available or was difficult to arrange, meaning someone had to be at home when the school bus drove by to pick up the food. So there's some opportunities to think carefully about how we handle food distribution for school meals, maybe moving forward, both in our current context where many school-age children are either not in school full-time or 100% distance learning, or if schools have to transition back to 100% remote again.
So as we talked about previously, there's a lot of variation when it comes to how food pantries operate, and it's really difficult to characterize these organizations because of that variability. However, the preliminary responses to the survey, I think, are important when we think about how to best support Mainers who are experiencing kind of emergency need. Again, survey respondents said, yes, these food pantries are useful and they're providing a helpful service. However, many folks also reported there were limits to how often they could visit the pantries that were near their home. Additional limitations included long wait lines, limited supply of food, inconvenient hours or irregular hours, and low quality food. So those were some of the primary barriers. Kate, do you mind if I go through the next slide? Okay. Overall, I think folks had some really interesting things to say about the food assistance programs in general. The greatest perceived barriers, I think, include travel to program offices, the degree to which respondents valued their independence. Those were two interesting themes that I think we can address really briefly. The first is just to recognize that, to enroll in some of these programs, participants have to drive a long distance. They have to do it on a semi-regular basis, and that can kind of impinge upon their ability to work in certain situations, so they get in this catch-22. Particular to Maine, I think a sense of independence and not having to rely on assistance programs is a significant barrier. The value independence has been demonstrated in the past in sociological studies, but it's also just evident from living in our state. So there's something to be said about designing outreach and education that really kind of capitalizes on this idea of self-sufficiency rather than on this idea of charity and support. It might go over better. We're gonna cap off today's talk with a quick summary of what we learned about home food production. As I said, we're particularly interested in home food production and how activities related to home food production were affected by the pandemic. And Kate, do you want to summarize these next two slides?
Sure, thank you. So you can see from Food Source, we see that there is an increase in home food production activities such as gardening, food preservation, and then ultimately maintenance of these food sources, which provides an opportunity for volunteers. And we know within Cooperative Extension, our home horticulture, master gardener volunteers, our master food preservers, our weekly food preservation webinars have really been in high demand to meet this changing area of food provisioning ultimately. And among respondents, we see gardening and canning, freezing and drying were the most common home provisioning approaches that were documented most recently, maybe for the first time or more this year. We see that since March, there's been new interest and increase in backyard animal production, food preservation, and foraging as well. And gardening may also result in more food that's donated to local pantries. We know that we have really strong gleaning programs here within Maine, whether they're statewide or they're local. So also Good Shepherd Food Bank purchases produce that's grown by Maine farmers, and our gleaning programs with Cooperative Extension, and some small scale nutrition education programs at food pantries in select counties.
We did a similar type of analysis to look at who was engaging with some of these activities on a first-time basis. And I'll just say briefly that there were some exciting things that we found about people who were struggling to afford food on a regular basis after the pandemic started, and the folks who were trying out some of these home provisioning activities for the first time, which I will kind of summarize in an opportunity in our closing slides. And I'm sorry to rush through, I just see the top of the hour coming quickly. In summary, we learned a lot. It was really exciting, and it pointed us towards 7 really discrete kind of policy and program shifts that we want to end on. The first is that there's an increase in opportunity to expand online ordering or curbside pickup services through federal assistance programs. Schools need to be better supported. They are moving mountains, but if we want to better meet people's needs, we have to consider how to best support them to expand delivery options or increase hours of pickup. I think we want to kind of enhance the support for food pantries and other emergency food distribution sites, similarly, to increase hours and increase access that people have to those sites. That there's an opportunity to align nutrition education with changing market conditions, thinking about the overlap between how prices affect what foods people are able to get. That outreach and education can be sensitive to cultural values such as independence, and that we have this real opportunity to integrate education related to food production and preservation into some of these existing food assistance programs, specifically the educational components that Kate was talking about at the top of the hour. And that along with this, we could increase material benefits related to home food production and preservation, thinking about how we can create these federal, state, and local partnerships to help income eligible families do things like buy food preservation supplies or get hunting licenses and enroll in safety courses and things like that. So with that, we thank you for your attention. Sorry to speed through the last bit of it. And for those of you who can, we'd love to hear your thoughts.
Everyone, although they can't see us, our wonderful speakers, this is Linda, can't see us, clap your hands for just a really great talk. We have a survey. Oh, great. They're starting my video. You can see me whether you want to or not. A question before can we not do the survey quite yet? One of the things that's so interesting today is we have really a diverse audience here, listening to the important things that you both have been saying. So what can we do? There are students here from different majors. There are community members here. There are researchers here. There are people from Cooperative Extension. Do you have 2 or 3 suggestions for who we should get the word to about your great talk and ask them to watch it, and also what we could do?
Kate, take it away.
Well, thank you. I think part of it is just learn what the needs are in your community. Learn where the food pantries are. Did you know how many food pantries do we have in Orono, in Old Town? Learn about food assistance programs, learn about the benefits, learn about the process, maybe some of the barriers for application. I think learning what nutrition education or other type of education is already existing versus thinking about, oh, we need to start this program. Chances are in Maine, we have it already. I know there were some questions about how the differences are between different assistance programs or a food pantry. I'm happy to share some information about that, in an email later. Some of it is income-wise, some of it is because it's private, it's not federal. It could be the life stage that a specific program serves. So learning about that is important, but just maybe taking some time and learn. We did list some resources. Maybe we can share those after. Some are books, some have some explicit language, so I'll note that. Dr. Ruby Payne, Donna Beagle have a lot of great resources if you want to learn what it's like, how stressful it is to live in poverty or experience food insecurity, how that affects not just the food that you purchase or bring into your household, but how it really affects every other component of your life. So it's more than food.
Great. You mentioned books. Do you have a book recommendation? Let's say we wanted to start a book club so we could all learn even more from the great things that you've had to say. A suggestion?
I have a couple of books that I've read. Nickel and Dimed on Not Getting By in America is actually a relatively old book, but it follows a journalist living paycheck to paycheck at different jobs. The author does visit Maine. I think it's in the 90s. Bootstraps in America, not, what is that? Let me see. It is Hand to Mouth, Living in Bootstraps America. That is the book that has some explicit language. There's a movie called A Place at the Table, which actually has a premise of eradicating childhood hunger by 2015. And painfully enough, 5 years later, it is still incredibly relevant. So it follows the life of a couple of families who are experiencing food insecurity.
Great. And Rachel also suggested some books. Thank you very much. And I know we've run out of time, but we all want to keep talking to you and keep watching what you're doing and thinking about how we can all work together. Hearing about children is very distressing. Knowing that if we come together across our different roles, we can make a difference. That's just so important. So let's end with the survey. And again, although they can't see us clapping, let's clap and let's fill out the survey, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much for having us.
Yes, thank you.